The crack ran from the upper left corner of Marcus Hale's phone screen diagonally to the center, a fracture that had split 6 weeks ago into 8 smaller tributaries, so that looking at the display was like looking through a spider's web at whatever was behind it. There was no case. The battery icon sat at 9%. Marcus had set the phone face up on the small table in the Millhaven Business Center and had not glanced at it since, because the notification it was displaying had already been absorbed and filed not with excitement, not with relief, but with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting 4 years for something and knows that waiting is not yet over. The notification said, Thermogen Wire confirmed Tranche 1, $75 million. Reference, IP Transfer Agreement, Hale Patent Portfolio. Nadia Voss walked in at 3:34 and took in the room in one practiced sweep. She was in Millhaven for a site walkthrough at 5. She had 45 minutes, and she needed a table and a working printer, and somewhere to be that was not a car. The only available seat was adjacent to the man with the cracked phone and the legal pad and the coffee he had not touched in 20 minutes. She sat down. She looked at the phone. She looked at the man, his hands, his worn sleeve, the absence of any case on the device, and she made her assessment in the time it takes to look at something and look away. She did not hold the phone close enough to read the screen. She had seen the crack. That was sufficient. She reached into her bag, set her laptop on the table, and did not look at the phone again. The phone sat between them in the afternoon light, its battery at 9%, the notification waiting on the other side of the glass. She had no way of knowing it would become the most expensive thing she had ever failed to read. Marcus had been in the garage since the garage had stopped being a garage 3 years ago. The floor was sealed concrete. Along the north wall ran 12 feet of continuous workbench, and on that bench sat things that did not belong together in any conventional workshop. A thermal conductivity meter with a data cable running to a laptop. 4 sealed sample containers labeled in his handwriting with alphanumeric codes that corresponded to a spreadsheet he kept on an encrypted backup, a legal pad dense with surface adhesion coefficient calculations, and a ring binder whose spine read WO 2021/189442 prosecution history. On the south wall, pinned without frames, were 3 certificates. One bore the seal of MIT Lincoln Laboratory. One bore the seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The third was a thank you letter from a bridge manufacturer in Gothenburg, whose deck compound had survived 4 consecutive winters above the Arctic Circle. Marcus had received it last January and pinned it there without reading it again, because the letter was from 2024 and Elena had died in 2022. And some victories arrived too late to share with the person who made them possible. At the far end of the south wall, balanced on the lower edge of the MIT certificate, was a small yellow mechanical pencil. Lily had placed it there that morning because she had decided it needed somewhere important to sit while she was at school. Marcus had not moved it. He was working on a consultation report for a bridge deck manufacturer in Portland, Oregon, whose surface compound was delaminating at temperatures below -20 Celsius. He had diagnosed the problem, a thermal bonding coefficient mismatch between the surface layer and the underlying substrate from the specification sheet alone, without visiting the site, in approximately 8 minutes. The fee was $2,000. He took jobs like this because they kept his hands in the science during the years when everything else had been locked up in litigation, and because a solvable problem was something he had learned to treasure in ways he couldn't explain to people who hadn't spent 4 years facing one that wasn't. The problem that was not solvable by chemistry or physics had a name. His attorney had called that morning at 8:15 with 2 pieces of news. The first, Thermogen Industries had confirmed receipt of Tranche 1. The second, the opposing counsel had filed for a continuance in the federal proceeding. The judge had denied it. 11 days. The material adverse change window in the IP transfer agreement closed in 11 days, and if the fraudulent co-inventor injunction was not vacated before that window closed, Thermogen would walk, and the $150 million would dissolve back into a patent file and 4 years of legal expense and nothing else. Marcus had absorbed this, thanked his attorney, and returned to the Portland report. His dread for the afternoon sat the way cold sits in concrete, not sharp, not sudden, just present, running all the way through. He picked Lily up at 3:15. She came through the school's side door with her backpack on one shoulder and the yellow pencil in her left hand, which meant she had used it at school despite his gentle suggestion that it might be safer kept at home. And he looked at this and arrived at the conclusion he always arrived at, which was that she was right. The pencil had been Elena's. Elena had carried it in her left breast pocket every day she worked in the lab, and she had told Marcus once that she clicked it 3 times before every important calculation, not because it helped the calculation, she said, but because it organized the part of her brain that wanted to skip ahead. Lily had found the pencil in Elena's jacket the night Elena did not come home from the lab. She had been carrying it for 18 months. She had not explained why, and Marcus had not asked. He told her they were stopping at the Millhaven Business Center for an hour while he printed some documents. She accepted this and climbed into the truck with her library book and her notebook. She was 7 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's habit of tilting her head 3 degrees to the left before she spoke, as though her thoughts needed to be angled correctly before they came out. Nadia Voss had, by that same morning, acquired 47 companies. She had stripped the founding partners of a rival firm of their $34 million carried interest before 9 a.m., and she had opened briefly, then immediately closed a folder of neurological assessment notes from her brother's specialist. Daniel was 29 years old and had been living with an ALS diagnosis for 14 months. Nadia had funded 3 research institutes and authorized a $40 million endowment to a molecular biology program that the department chair called the most generously funded single disease commitment in the department's history. None of it moved fast enough. Science ran at its own pace regardless of what she allocated to it, and her money could not change the pace of the thing being studied, which was the only thing that mattered, and the one thing she had not been able to move. The neurologist's notes were still in the folder. She had been telling herself she would open them tonight for 6 days. She drove to Millhaven at 3:20 for the 5 o'clock site walkthrough, and they arrived at the same small business center within 2 minutes of each other from opposite directions, which was not the kind of collision anyone chooses. She was seated and working when Marcus and Lily came in at 3:34. Marcus set his coffee and legal pad at the adjacent table, the only one near an outlet, and arranged his papers in the order he always arranged them, left to right. He set the phone face up on the corner of the table. Lily took the far end of the room with her library book and notebook, and opened the book to page 41, where the important part had not yet happened. Nadia registered them peripherally. The child, by it, reading, no projected noise risk. The man, Wernal shirt with the left elbow going thin. Work boots with the left sole creasing unevenly from years of standing on one side. Hands that moved with the habitual precision of someone who handled equipment rather than documents. And the phone. She had looked at the phone for 1 second and made her picture of the man who owned it, and she had returned to the environmental assessment she was reviewing for the Millhaven acquisition. She read 2 pages. She was 3 sentences into the third when Marcus reached for the legal pad and inadvertently swept a document to the floor near her chair. She picked it up without looking before she could stop herself from looking. The page was dense with thermal conductivity figures and surface adhesion coefficients, arranged with the precision of someone who organized numbers, because that was how they saw the world. She handed it back. "Thank you," he said, without looking up. She looked at her screen. She read one sentence. Then she said, "Is that a delamination report?" He looked up. He looked at her with the attention of someone deciding whether a question deserves its full answer. He said, "Consultation." Bridge deck. Portland. She turned her laptop slightly toward him, not fully offering it, pointing to page 6 of the environmental assessment. She had open a surface adhesion figure of 2.1 megapascals beside a photograph of the east-facing exterior deck of the Millhaven facility she was acquiring. She had a question mark in the margin. Same problem, possibly. Does 2.1 megapascals hold at extended sub-zero? He looked at the screen. His eyes moved to the figure. Then to the photograph, specifically to the expansion joints visible at the deck's approach side, and to the angle of the roof overhang above them, which told him something about drainage and thermal cycling. He looked for 4 seconds. "No," he said. "At -18 sustained, that compound loses adhesion along the structural interface. Failure starts at those approach expansion joints, propagates laterally. You'll see the first separation in the second winter after installation. Third, if the temperature variance is mild. But it will happen." She had not told him what the climate conditions were. She had shown him one number and one photograph, and he had named the failure mode, the specific joint, the direction of propagation, and the timeline. She looked at him. She said, "You diagnosed that from the adhesion figure and the photo." "And the joint angle," he said. He returned to his legal pad. Nadia looked at the table. She looked at his phone. The crack across the screen caught the afternoon light and threw a small pale spectrum onto the table surface between them. She looked at the crack, and she looked at the man who had apparently not found occasion to replace a phone with a screen in that condition, and she said, not unkindly, but with the particular precision of someone who finds avoidable disorder an unnecessary choice, "You should replace that." He glanced at it. He said, "It still works." He returned to the legal pad. She returned to the environmental assessment. The phone sat between them with the notification still on the screen, in a room where the afternoon light was going long, and the only sound for the next 12 minutes was the quiet movement of a 7-year-old turning to page 42. Nadia had read 4 more pages of the environmental assessment, actually read them, not passed her eyes over them, when she realized she had done something she had not done in a working hour in longer than she could accurately remember, which was forget to think about 3 other things simultaneously. She looked up. Marcus was at the legal pad, pen moving in short. At the far end of the room, Lily had stopped reading and was walking toward the table, library book pressed to her chest, tilting her head 3 degrees to the left as she walked. She stopped beside Nadia's chair. She looked at Nadia directly, the way children look at things before they have been taught to look sideways. She said, "Dad says you can tell what a person is really scared of by what they clothe." Nadia looked at the child. She said, with the careful construction of someone assembling a response from principles, "That's a very perceptive observation." Lily's expression did not change. She said, as though Nadia had said exactly the right thing, "He closes the lab sometimes when he doesn't want to think about something. But he always goes back." She sat down at the edge of her father's table, opened the book, and clicked the yellow pencil twice. She read. Nadia looked at the child. She looked at the pencil, its body worn smooth at the grip, a small adhesive label on the clip gone amber at the edges, the cap replaced at some point with one from a different pencil that was slightly too large, but had been pressed on anyway. She did not ask about it. Something in the way the girl held it indicated that the question, if asked, would arrive in the wrong register. She said to the child, "What are you reading?" Lily looked up. She considered the question. She said, "The part where something important is about to happen." She looked back at the book. Nadia sat with that for a moment. She was aware of being at a slight angle to where she had been when she walked in. Something had shifted, not dramatically, without announcement, and she was not certain what to do with that awareness, and she returned to the environmental assessment. She read one paragraph. She was rereading it when the door opened, and Conrad Hesse walked in. She knew him from IP and venture circles, and she had registered him, in 2 prior meetings, as the variety of man who treats proximity to power as a form of power itself. He arrived speaking end-of-day instructions to his assistant on the phone, and he ended the call as he spotted Marcus and crossed the room toward. And he sat down across from Marcus without acknowledging Nadia and without acknowledging Lily, and before he was fully seated he reached across the table and straightened Marcus's coffee cup so that the handle sat perpendicular to the table edge. He did not ask. He reached and corrected. "The way you correct something that exists in your own," he said. "You should have taken the offer, Marcus. The continuance being denied doesn't change your position. You have 10 days. 11, Marcus said. He had not looked up. Conrad said, "My counsel is filing an amended brief this evening. The co-inventor claim is documentable. I have dated lab reports from Q4 2019. Marcus set his pen down. He turned slightly toward Conrad. He said, and his voice did not rise, did not change register, did not acquire any of the textures of anger. You filed a co-inventor declaration on application 17-423,891 using a collaboration agreement dated January 9, 2020. That agreement was inserted into the prosecution history by a paralegal at the USPTO contractor firm. You paid $185,000 for that insertion from your LLC Hesse Applied Sciences, account ending in 4409, wired to a shell called Praxis Document Services on March 2, 2021. The SEC whistleblower intake for docket 2022 WB 04817 has had that full payment chain since last February. He looked at Conrad. He said, "The examiner who signed the backdated attestation has been cooperating since April." Conrad sat very still. Marcus picked up his pen. He returned to the legal pad. Conrad stood. He walked to the door. At the door, his right hand rose reflexively toward his lapel, toward the posture from which the straightening gesture was generated, and then the hand stopped. It did not complete the motion. It dropped to his side. He pushed through the door and was gone, not with drama, not with a parting line, just the departure of a man from a room where the pressure he had carried had been quietly and completely released. Nadia sat at the adjacent table. She did not speak. She looked at Conrad's chair, then at the coffee cup he had straightened, still perpendicular to the table edge, exactly where he had left it. She looked at the legal pad, where Marcus had resumed writing as though nothing had interrupted him. She had spent 19 years making men go quiet in boardrooms, and she had just watched a man do it in 11 cents at a table in a business center, with a legal pad and a half-empty coffee, without once raising his voice above the register he used to discuss bridge deck delamination. She looked at the cracked phone on the table. She looked at the notification on the screen. She was close enough now, and she read. She looked at Marcus. He was writing. She did not speak for a very long time. When Lily clicked the yellow pencil and quietly turned to page 43, the sound was the loudest thing in the room. She did not drive to the manufacturing site at 5 o'clock. She drove back to her office, and she had her research director run Marcus Hale before she had finished reviewing the Meridian settlement paperwork waiting on her desk. The results came back in 38 minutes, and she read the primary sources herself. The MIT Lincoln Laboratory Staff Archive, Marcus Hale. Research Scientist, Advanced Materials Division, active through April 20. The patent, WO 2021/189442, filed April 14, 2021, sole inventor listed as Marcus Hale, Millhaven, New Hampshire. A thermal bonding compound for flexible photovoltaic substrates, one that allowed flexible solar panels to maintain 94% conversion efficiency at temperatures as low as -30 Celsius, something that had not previously existed at commercial scale, and that every major northern climate solar installation currently depended on. She sent the abstract to her head of energy investments at 9:47 p.m. His response came back in 11 minutes. This is the core IP in the Thermogen deal. This is what the $150 M is for. She sat with that sentence for a long time. Then she opened the Voss Energy Innovation subsidiary ledger, the renewables holding entity she had established 3 years ago, currently generating licensing income from a sub-license agreement with Thermogen on a photovoltaic bonding technology. She had reviewed this ledger in quarterly summaries 4 times. The income line read, PV substrate licensing sub-license, Thermogen Industry. She had never looked past the label. There had been no reason to look past the label. The name behind the original patent was Marcus Hale. Her company had been earning licensing income from his invention for 18 months. She had sat 11 inches from him that afternoon and looked at his cracked phone and told him it needed to be replaced. She authorized Voss Capital's entry as amicus in the federal proceeding against the injunction before 10 p.m., attaching the full Voss Energy Innovation licensing chain and its independent financial documentation, which traced directly and unambiguously back to Marcus's sole inventorship, and which Conrad Hesse had no standing to contest. Then she sat in her office for a long time without opening any more files. She drove to Millhaven the next morning. The garage door was open. The garage smelled of solvent and sealed concrete and something she did not have a category for. Marcus was at the workbench with the conductivity meter when she pulled in, and he looked out at the driveway and did not appear surprised, the way people who have been waiting for something sometimes fail to appear surprised when it finally arrives. She stood in the doorway. She looked at the workbench and the certificates on the south wall and the empty place on the MIT seal where the yellow pencil had been. She said, Voss Energy Innovation. Yes, he said. I didn't know, she said. I know, he said. He said it without accusation, which was the part that was hardest to receive. The sublicense ran through 2 intermediaries. There was no reason to trace it until there was. She looked at the bench against the north window, the sitting bench, the one with the worn finish on the left side and the single coffee mug resting on the wood as though it sat there every morning, which it did. She worked here, Nadia said. It was not a question. He set down the meter. He said, the night she died she was at that bench running calculations. The application had been filed 2 days before. A pause. She never knew what it became. Nadia looked at the bench. 1 mug. The worn finish on the left side where someone had sat many times, and the right side still intact. She thought about a woman she had never known, sitting at a window on a night that was the last one, running numbers on something that would eventually earn $150 million and change 3 countries' solar capacity and mean nothing to her by morning, because she would not be there to know it. She sat down on the bench. She sat on the right side. She said, my brother's name is Daniel. He's 29. Al's 14 months. He said nothing. He let her have the sentence. She said, I've funded 3 research institutes. I cannot fund faster science. I keep trying to find a way to make it move. He said, no, you can't. She looked at the window. The maple at the edge of the backyard was going red at its tips and still green at the center. which was a thing she had not noticed in a very long time, and she noticed it now. She said, "I looked at your phone yesterday and thought I already knew exactly what you were." He said, "I know what you thought." She said, "I was wrong about most of it." He said, "You weren't wrong about the coffee." She looked at him. He was almost smiling. It was a small thing, and it was enough. Conrad's final move arrived 7 days into the 11-day window, at 3:47 p.m. On a Thursday, his attorneys filed an emergency brief arguing that the patent proceeds from the Thermogen transfer constituted a marital asset from the estate of Elena Hale, and that the 10% trust allocation Marcus had designated for Lily, named in the brief as minor child Lily A. Hale. Trust account 7734NH constituted a fraudulent transfer designed to shield assets from the co-inventor dispute. They requested an immediate freeze of the trust account pending resolution of the full claim, which the brief estimated would take 18 to 24 months. Marcus read it once. He set his phone on the workbench. He looked at the sitting bench against the window for a moment. Then he picked the phone up and called Nadia. She was in her car by 4:20. Her litigation team had their brief drafted by 643 pages, attaching the Voss Energy Innovation licensing chain, a forensic accounting audit of the Hesse Applied Sciences to Praxis Document Services payment, and a sworn declaration from the USPTO contract examiner who had been cooperating since April, who named Conrad Hesse by name and described the full mechanism of the backdated attestation in that left no interpretive margin. The brief was filed in the federal docket at 6:47 p.m. The emergency hearing convened at 9 a.m. The following morning in Judge Anita Farrell's courtroom in the Federal District Building in Concord, Marcus sat in the gallery with his hands flat on his knees. Nadia sat beside him. His attorney stood at the front and argued the full record, the prosecution history, the payment trail, the examiner's declaration, the Voss filing, 18 months of third-party licensing income constituting independent corroboration of sole inventorship. Conrad sat at the opposing table, and when his attorney had finished, Conrad reached forward toward the water glass in front of him, the reaching gesture. The straightening, and then his hand stopped. The motion did not complete. His hand came back. He folded it in his lap. Judge Farrell reviewed Voss Capital's submission for 5 minutes and 40 seconds. The courtroom was quiet enough that Nadia could hear Marcus breathing beside her, steady and unchanged. The judge looked up. She read the order. The motion for injunctive relief filed by Hesse Applied Sciences LLC and Conrad J. Hesse is hereby vacated. The co-inventor claim on application 17-423,891 is dismissed with prejudice. She signed it. The clerk stamped it. 3 sentences. Done. Conrad stood when his attorney touched his arm. He walked to the side door without looking at Marcus. He walked through it. He did not look back. His posture as he walked was the posture of someone discovering, in real time, that the floor he had been standing on for 4 years was no longer beneath him, not a collapse, not a stumble. Just the altered mechanics of a man adjusting to an absence that was now permanent. Marcus's attorney turned from the front. She looked at him. She had been his attorney for 4 years, and she was not the kind of person who celebrated in courtrooms. She nodded once. Nadia looked at Marcus. His hands were still flat on his knees. His knuckles were not white. His breathing had not changed. His face, when Judge Farrell read the words "dismissed with prejudice," had done one thing. Something in the area around his eyes had shifted. The way ice shifts in a glass when the temperature finally changes, small, internal, not visible from across a room, but unmistakable from 11 inches. The thing that had been held in a particular way for 4 years was no longer held that. She looked at that. She did not look away. 8 months later, Lily's yellow pencil lived in her left breast pocket, now the same pocket her mother had used. She had moved it there from her hand sometime in February, and she had not explained why, and Marcus had not asked. Because some transitions arrive without requiring explanation, and he had learned to recognize them by the quiet way she had given a presentation to her second-grade class called What Things Are Made Of and Why They Don't Break. Organized around a framework Marcus had explained to her at the workbench one morning while she watched him work on the Portland report. She had drawn the diagram herself. She had not looked at her notes once during the presentation. Her teacher had written on the feedback form she sent home. She spoke as though she already knew her audience had the capacity to understand. Marcus had read that twice and pinned it to the south wall of the garage, below the MIT certificate, in the place where the yellow pencil used to sit. The garage lab was unchanged. The workbench still ran 12 feet. The 3 certificates were still on the south wall. On the sitting bench against the north window, 1 coffee mug rested on the wood on weekday mornings. On Thursdays, Nadia had started driving up from Portsmouth on Thursdays, and she had started leaving the office before 7 on Thursdays, which was new. There were 2. The second mug sat on the right side of the bench, where the finish was still intact, and it stayed there through the working, and the 2 of them worked in the same room with the ease of people who have discovered that their silences are the same shape. His hand was close to hers on the wood. It had been close for most of the morning. Neither of them moved it. Outside the window, the maple tree had lost everything: the October red, the November amber, the last of the leaves, and gone to bare. And through those branches, the January sky was the particular blue that belongs only to New Hampshire in winter. Cold and exact and without ambiguity. A sky that holds nothing back and asks nothing in return. The things built in silence, carried through years when no audience existed to witness them, are the ones the world eventually has no way of ignoring. If someone spent 4 years protecting something true, while the world quietly decided he was worth nothing, and you almost became one more voice, confirming what the world had decided, what would you owe him after you knew the truth? Not the money. That's already his. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that value and visibility have never been the same thing. Subscribe if this story earned it, and tell us in the comments right now, what is the one thing in your life that the world has quietly underestimated, and what would it take for the right person to finally see it? We read every one.